What do you think the difference is between finding pornography in your experience at your age and the kids that are going into it and experiencing it now?
I honestly can't fathom, if I tried to relive my story in today's culture, how I would have survived. I am a different person today than I was then. I was somebody that was pursuing pure hedonism. If I look at myself in the throes of my decade-plus struggle, it was...
How many kids or young people just in general, say under 25, are getting addicted to this stuff?
Yeah, there's multiple stats on this. It's really somewhere between...
Where do you think the women stand in all of it?
Oh, women struggle just as much as men now.
Yeah, so you said earlier you're super passionate about parenting your children in this.
You don't have time. You cannot wait. You're on a race with the devil to get to your kids first. Oh, wow. That's a crazy question. I've never thought about it that way.
I'm going to pretty much just skip a whole intro because nobody really cares about the intro. They just want to hear about you and your story and everything. And so everybody's super excited. We got a bunch of people that were really anticipating you being here. So
cool.
Yeah. So I was thinking we've gotten to sit down and talk a little bit, and I've gotten to know you a little bit, but we're kind of newer in our relationship, getting to know each other. But you are the CEO of Proven Ministries, which is super awesome. Like, I've gotten to check that out a lot, and I love what you're doing over there, and I love your heart for it. And so, but before we were getting into that, I was thinking we could just jump into what most people are excited to hear about, which is your testimony and your story, and your kind of, I guess, what led you into that passion of getting into, you know, Proven Men and starting that up. So
yeah, man, happy to share it. My testimony is unique, and it has like different really wild highlight points, from one moment when I accidentally ended up dating a stripper to, you know, growing up in the church. And so like it's a unique story. And I was raised in the church. So for me, I grew up in an amazing Christian home. My parents are amazing, you know, still lovely, married to this day, grew up on a farm. And for me, being the millennial, I was raised in the generation of, like, I remember the dial-up internet sound. I remember not having any internet. I remember getting my first laptop when I was on my way to college, and that being a massive marker in my purity story. And so at a young age, I loved Jesus, went to church every day, had an amazing family, but found myself very fascinated with the feminine body that wasn't really done in my culture. There was no such thing as a sex talk. And so I remember at an early age going to the mailbox to clip magazines and stuff different clippings under my mattress. And I remember stumbling upon a hardcore pornographic magazine when I was on a like Boy Scout like trip. It was called Christian Service Brigade at that time, and you know, it was a magazine in a random house we were staying in that they had no idea was there. Yeah. So again, very much what most people's story is, which is an inappropriately early age of exposure. And that began a really long and unfortunate journey of being pretty okay and pretty protected when I was at home. When, you know, there were some moments, again, with the invention of the internet, and I would find myself browsing places I wasn't supposed to on the internet. And then, of course, I would get called out, and I'd make up some excuse about it being a pop-up or an ad. And parents just didn't know what they didn't know at that point. Right. And so it was a lot easier to hide. It was a lot easier to fake or just cover things up. So that really began in those middle school, more high school aged time. Yeah. And I would say it exploded when I went to college. Okay. And is that around the time like the internet was taking full force? Yes. Okay. So the invention of the smartphone, or I would say the ubiquitous nature of the smartphone, happened around that time. I went to college in 2006 through 2010. And so that was when I left the protection of my home and was on my own. And I think a big defining part of my testimony is, and this is really not exactly to fault my parents, it was just more the nature of the world around me at that time, but I just didn't know what I didn't know, and then all the guardrails and blocks were taken off, and I was on my own, and I could make my own decisions. Mm-hmm. And so that led down for lack of a better term, a very dark path of being addicted to pornography, masturbation, lust, dating. For me, I didn't have a problem with sex because it felt good and I wanted to do it. And so I really engaged in this, I would say, double-faced life. Or, I still loved Jesus. I still went to church, but I also still really did this thing that felt good.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to stop. And there wasn't a whole lot at that time. And so we can double click on any pieces of this testimony part, but I spent the better part of well over a decade struggling in the deep throes of addiction, in the deep throes of struggle, and then the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And that was really, everybody has a different aha moment, but that was mine. And so in my testimony, I got to a point where I was like, well, I'm going to start doing things differently, because why should I keep acting the same way and expecting different results? So it's like, all right, I'm going to actually find self-control and pursue relationships where sex was off the table, where any level of intercourse was off the table, and it's an unfortunate story in that I didn't really have a guide, and there was some stuff. XXXchurch.com was big at that time, but one of the motivations for my position today is we can say to individuals that are struggling, hey, we literally have a path for you. We have the proven path. It is how you can lock arms with brothers and pursue purity together. And so it's exciting for me to be in the place that I'm at now, because I think that was the thing I needed in my story. I needed a guide. I needed someone to follow. I needed someone to lock arms with, and I needed a path to follow. And at that time, culturally speaking, the path was go to church more, pray harder, and maybe you'll find freedom. And that's just not realistic. It doesn't negate the power of the Holy Spirit or the power of God, but it's just, when you're dealing with something that is this level of addictive and has gotten individuals at unfortunately young ages, you just have a neuroplasticity thing taking place in your brain with heightened levels of dopamine and super stimuli, and you're really kind of playing in science land where you're thinking about heroin addiction and cocaine addiction, and that's kind of what was happening in my brain. And so I'm excited and passionate about being on the other side of my testimony, changing my actions, committing to doing whatever it took, saying enough is enough. And then equally, this is an abridged version, but started dating someone who wanted the same things. That made a huge difference, right? Two people in a relationship that want to hold purity to an incredibly top 2, top 3 standard was that changed everything. I never dated a girl that didn't want to have sex. And today in this culture, I would say that's even more relevant than it was back then. And so, it was a really, unfortunately, slow crawl from the pit out to freedom around committing to the Lord that I was going to maintain an area of self-control here that I hadn't previously, that I was going to seek his face and fill myself up with the things of God and not the things of my flesh and the things that my flesh was screaming at. And then on top of that, I had these unique moments where, on the way out of this slow crawl of the pit, I was dating someone who turned out to be a stripper, and I didn't know that.
That's crazy.
It was a wild story. It was a short dating relationship, and I kind of had a very small role in helping her get out of the industry, because at that point I was like, hey, you don't have to live like this. This doesn't have to be how you are defined. And I was like, God, what just happened? And then I had another girl break up with me because I wouldn't have sex with her. And I was like, what just happened? This has never happened before. And there were just these unique moments that really continued to culminate towards when I met my wife and we started dating, and she was a missionary in England, and she was just it was humbling how well she loved Jesus and how much she was equally wanting to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue. And I would say that's a bit of the crescendo moment where having that other person, and then really we started talking, got married a year later. And I mean, that was the really what it what changed everything, because I had changed the framework of my life. I had changed the inputs in my life. I had decided to finally elevate God to the number one status.
Yeah.
And then it really helps when you're not alone doing that, and having my wife to be there on that component of the journey was amazing.
For sure. So when you were a kid, this is kind of backtracking kind of far back, but how young were you when you found like the magazines? Because you said you were cutting stuff out.
Yeah, the JCPenney magazines and the Victoria's Secret magazines, I was probably 10,
okay.
11.
Yeah.
Got exposed to hardcore pornography from a magazine probably around 13, 14. It's all a bit of a blur, but something like that sounds right.
How do you think that affected you as a kid?
Oh, it was everything. So, and that's one of the motivations for me today, is to help parents step into this space with their children, because I didn't exactly have that. I had loving and amazing parents, but I didn't really have a framework for, I saw this, I'm curious about this, I should go talk to my parents about this. And so it went into this is interesting, I'm intrigued, let's keep this in hiding, this is dirty, there's some shame around here.
Yeah.
And I really just stayed in isolation with this fascination and this draw experience that I was having at this early age. And it just became this defining component of my life. It wasn't like I didn't have another life, but it was just always a massive factor. And unfortunately, statistically speaking, that is what almost everybody is experiencing today, with an unfortunate early age of exposure, and then not really knowing what to do after that moment.
Yeah.
And then continually being drawn in, and it growing slowly over time in darkness and isolation.
What do you think the difference is between when you found pornography? The internet wasn't super huge, and so it wasn't an extreme high stimulus of like tons of browsers open and pages and flipping through and at high speeds, and super quick dopamine rushes. What do you think the difference is between finding pornography and your experience at your age and the kids that are going into it and experiencing it now?
I honestly can't fathom, if I tried to relive my story in today's culture, how I would have survived. It would have been much worse.
Yeah.
So the short answer is, I think, in a weird way, I still was given a gift where it was hard to find. I wasn't able to easily access hardcore pornography. I was looking for the next magazine to come in the mail.
Yeah.
There was a gift in that people don't have today, because everyone is walking around with a smartphone in their pocket or a tablet in their house, and the ubiquitous nature of the internet now, whether it's a gaming system that accesses the internet or whatever, these young kids can find this incredibly addictive, spiritually damaging material, and it just begins to stick to them way too strongly from a crazy early age.
Yeah.
So I would say my story, you could pour jet fuel on it for anybody who is in today's world, which is all the more reason why it's important that this be a forefront issue that we're discussing, that we are helping individuals in the space, that we are equipping parents to help their children. Because some people listening today, might be teenage, early 20s, early 30s, but the sad reality is that the average age of exposure is now 8 years old.
Yeah.
And so you don't have 8-year-olds listening to this podcast, but there might be some parents, or maybe you will become a parent, right? Like, there's a component of the story that is important not to gloss over, which is, what are we doing to help this younger generation? Because they're getting hooked at crazy early ages, and then their brains are getting hijacked. And then, of course, why would we expect them to have any concept of what healthy relationships looks like or biblical sexuality looks like? Because the enemy has unfortunately gotten to them first, and they didn't have any context for how to overcome.
So you hear percentages thrown out all the time. I read them all the time. They're on the internet. But what do you think about percentages and how many kids or young people just in general, say under 25, are getting addicted to this stuff?
Yeah, there's multiple stats on this, but I would say the short version is, depending on which stat you read, it's really somewhere between 75 and 90%
Wow.
of young children under the age of 12.
Wow.
And, the statistics break it down around, whether it's a weekly exposure, whether it's a monthly exposure, how often someone's viewing. But I like using the average age of pornography exposure as a mile marker in the conversation, because it's like, okay, if that's the beginning, it's not almost worth getting in the weeds of what happens after that. It could be weekly viewing, it could be daily viewing, it could be monthly viewing, but either way, someone's stuck and or beginning to be drawn in at that point.
Yeah. What do you think that's doing to our culture in the long run?
The short version is it's making us this consumerist culture around the human body. So the human body is something just to be used and consumed and used for my pleasure. And it reduces any level of connection, any level of intimacy. And we've just turned everything into a meat market.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we see divorce rates where they are, broken home rates where they are. It's unfortunate. And obviously, I'm not saying that that is the only thing causing these problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're not given a good script in the beginning for how to have a framework for biblical sexuality, how to have a framework for, I'm a Christian, so I live this way. The world lives differently, and here's why I want to look different than the world, and here's why that's better. God's instructions are better. Those guardrails are for our goodness and thriving, not to keep us from nice things that we want. It's a cliche analogy, but if I wanted to eat ice cream every night, or if my kids wanted to eat ice cream every night, I would be a horrible father, and our God would be a horrible father if he said, yes, okay, you can indulge in that pleasure every night.
Yeah.
Because I would become very unhealthy, and it leads to death.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good example, and that analogy works in this way. And so healthy biblical sexuality, living in purity, and then should the Lord call you to marriage, getting married and having a vibrant, healthy sex life is, going back to that ice cream analogy, it's like everything in moderation. And, a 1-year-old shouldn't be eating ice cream, a 2-year-old, maybe a little bit of ice cream, but like there's a certain time when it's like, okay, you can have some ice cream, but you can only have it, so often, with sex. When you're married, then you can explore the bounds of this new opportunity that's been given to you by God.
Yeah.
If you try and do it before then, everything starts to fall apart.
Yeah. So how do you think that's manifesting in, say, you've got the 8-year-old boy who's like been addicted to this stuff. He just kind of gets into it all the way up into his 20s. How do you think that's manifested itself? I mean, you've kind of talked about like divorce rates and things like that could be affecting that. What are other ways you think it's manifesting just in a daily life of these kids?
I mean, I see it anecdotally in the stories that we're talking with people about every day. So, someone's newly married and they brought this porn problem into their marriage. They hoped it would fix it. It didn't. And then, a couple years later, it comes out that he's been struggling with and or addicted to pornography for the entire marriage, and everything is in a state of crisis, and they're having to do a lot of rebuilding. And you don't want to live in that world, I promise.
Yeah.
And so for the 8-year-olds, for the 9-year-olds, for the 10-year-olds, it's having their parents, their mentors come alongside of them to help them from going down this path. Because I would say there's two conversations to be had. One is, how do you help someone who's been down and on this path for the last 5 years, 10 years, right? Like you have been stuck for a very long time. There's no easy button to getting off that path. So it's hard work. It requires community. It requires a curriculum like the Proven Men curriculum. It requires brotherhood. It requires confessing your sins to one another and praying with one another so that you may be healed. And we see in the stories, it takes people years to break something like that because it's been years that they've been in it.
Yeah.
And then the other part of that conversation is, how can you help someone never get on the path?
Yeah.
And that frankly speaking, is the conversation I'm more interested in having these days because I have children, and so I'm very passionate about this.
Yes.
And I think that's the long-term solution. There's an interesting... So the Israelites in the wilderness after Egypt, or the Hebrews, when they were in the wilderness and they weren't allowed to see the promised land. So they were just wandering in the wilderness for generations, but their children were allowed into the promised land. So I think there's an interesting discussion to be had. Maybe you're a parent listening, maybe you will become a parent listening, and this has been something that's grabbed a hold of you and has been something you've been struggling with for a really long time. You don't get a pass. You still are on a very long road of now pursuing purity and breaking this struggle. But can you envision a reality where your children get to be in the promised land, get to not have tasted and experienced this difficult, hard struggle? And I think there's some extra motivation to be had there.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm sure you know this, younger people's brains are not as matured until you get to around the 25-year mark. And so your frontal lobe especially is a lot smaller, which has a lot to do with, controlling yourself and self-discipline, which means the younger that you are, the more you struggle with that. And so what do you think, how difficult do you think it is for younger people to get out of this? And how do you suggest, say you're talking to one of them, how would you suggest them go about it?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to get out. You can't do it by yourself. So let me just say that up front. And if you're a young man and you're in this and you're struggling with unwanted sexual behaviors, you have to lean in to a couple places, but I would say lean in to the truth we see in Scripture, the truth that we see, and really understand what these instructions are for how we're to use our body given to us by God, and how those are good guide rails that lead to thriving and flourishing. But then equally, when you're trying to get off the path or you're trying to get unstuck, you have to attach yourself to a community that's pursuing the same path. Because if you try to do it by yourself, you will not make it. And if you try to do it with just you and God, I'm not saying you won't make it, but we were built to live in community. We were built to have, God gave us parents for a reason, gives us mentors for a reason, gives us spiritual guides for a reason. And so I would simply say, acknowledging that this is something I'm going to have to fight for a season to get out the other side. And if you look at it like that, it changes the perspective. It's like, if you're literally in a fight for freedom, that fight might take a year. That fight might take 2 years. But you're fighting, you're leaning in, you're disciplining yourself, you're engaging the practices of spiritual discipline. You're not just wishing and hoping it's going to change. You actually have to do some work. You have to work hard on this path. It's not a works-based freedom, but that would be like going to a heroin addict and saying, just try really hard and you'll get free. No, you have to apply yourself. You have to go to detox. You have to engage in a reality that allows you to find yourself on a new path and then retrain your brain to want this new thing. So it just takes time. And I think people don't realize that. Whether you're in a marriage and there's been, something's been exposed and there's been a pornography struggle, addiction, unwanted sexual behaviors, whatever, there's no easy fix. You're on the tough path. There is an end to that path, but you have to apply yourself to the path.
You said accountability, basically telling somebody, was the first thing that you said, which is super important. I also agree that's super important, and I had to do it to be able to get out. And I'm curious to jump into your testimony a little more, and also as a recommendation to other people who are looking to be okay, if that's the next step, how do I even get to that point? Did you have to tell somebody? Did you have to tell your wife? How did that go?
Yeah, so part of my journey was before my wife, but yes, I had to find serious, intentional accountability. I had to really commit to changing my reality, which meant I ran with a dumb phone for a while, and obviously this is a different season, but you know, you need to use wisdom. So I think this is a helpful component. It's not weakness, it's wisdom to employ strategies in your path to freedom. So like an example would be our founder. In his story, he committed to being done going to the gym for at least a year because that was a place that he was regularly tempted. And obviously there's no prescription here, but you have to be wise when you go on this path of saying enough is enough. I'm going to do whatever it takes and, find accountability, commit to finding someone who can help you, who's going to check in with you regularly, who's going to say, hey, how are you doing this in this area? Who's going to say, hey, you turned off all your smartphone accesses and devices, because that is required for a season. There might be a reality, there definitely is a reality where you can come back to technology like that. But the longer and longer I do this, the more and more I realize that if you're in a deep and severe struggle, you just have to unplug and you'll be okay.
And I can attest to that too. You'll be okay after it happens. I mean, the intensity of going and sharing that, like you build up that fear for years of like, you just keep fortifying that you shouldn't do it. Like it just gets more intense as you go along. But the farther in you are addicted to this stuff is the more that you need to get out of it, which is ironic in the whole sense, but it makes sense when you see that there's the enemy attacking you for all of these things. And it's a good strategy to keep you afraid of telling others. What did it look like for you to, because I'm sure you had to build up that confidence to go into it too. What did that look like for you?
Building up my confidence to go into like the purity journey for myself?
Well, to specifically share with somebody and have an accountability partner.
Yeah, the short version is you just got to rip the Band-Aid off. And that was in my testimony where I said the definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And so for me, it was, I have to tell someone because I've been living the story of not telling someone, hoping it would just get better, hoping I could grip the steering wheel harder and do it on my own. And so you really just come to a moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to do it. Okay, I'm going to step out. Okay, I'm going to lean into this community. Okay, I'm going to lean into accountability in this space, whether I find one or two or three accountability partners. And that is the reality. And so, for me, that's what that looked like. It was clearing up my life of the things that were causing me to stumble and the stimulus inputs, and then simultaneously attaching myself to accountability, and then simultaneously committing to God that enough was enough and I was willing to do whatever it took, and then simultaneously committing to the path and the journey, and like all of those moving pieces together over a significant amount of time is where you begin to see fruit on the other side.
Okay, cool. So what do you think it is specifically about like telling somebody like that accountability that's so powerful that changes the game?
I think it really is everything in life. The way God made it is that if you shine a light on it, the darkness cannot hide anymore. And so it loses its power, it loses its hold, it loses its shaming. And so like that cycle is broken the second you shine a light on it. And when I say shine a light on it, I mean you let it out into the world and give it to somebody else, and you pursue that accountability. And you let it out of the dark corner it's been hiding in, and you say, hey, this is, and every guy is like, I'm the only one, no one else struggles. And it's this weird lie the enemy wants to tell every single person, obviously in the context of this podcast, every single man. And the second you start to bring it into the light, the second it begins to lose its power. And then this is where that commitment to the path matters, because you might bring it out into the light today, but when you go to bed tonight and then you wake up tomorrow morning, there's going to be a little lie that says, I can leave it in the darkness today. I can leave it over there in the corner in the shadow today because I did that good thing yesterday. No, it's like this radical exposure of this thing so that it can't grow. It would be the inverse of like, we need the sun for anything to grow. This stuff needs the darkness to grow. And so if you have this radical commitment to every day, I'm bringing it into the light. Every day, I'm committing to put on the armor of God and pursue this path with radical transparency and openness and honesty, it begins to, over time, wither and die.
So what age do you think you were in the most like thick of it, like the dumps, basically?
For me, it was definitely college.
College,
And obviously everybody's story is going to be different, but that was when I didn't have any guardrails and I could make whatever decision I wanted to make. And so that for me, which is why I'm so motivated about helping parents give their children a framework before they leave the home. Because if you don't give the younger generation a framework for how to live when they have their own autonomy in this space, they will not have the tools in place to thrive. And that's where we see people just fly off the rails.
Yeah.
And we want to be giving young people, the younger generation, those guardrails. What does it look like to leave the home, find yourself in a relationship, and someone wants to have sex with you? Hookup culture, dating culture, right? Like your parents, even if they're not having the sex talk with you, it's going to be harder, right? It's going to be harder to do whatever. Maybe, everybody, your parents are amazing. They might have some filters in place. They might be saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing that. But we want to be training the younger generation to answer the question, when I don't have mom and dad here and I'm on my own, why am I still making these decisions?
Yeah. So that college, like thick of it, and then to now, like you're way out of it. And what is the difference? How is that manifested in your life? What positive, like, what are the positive, I guess, benefits you could say that has changed your life?
Oh, wow. That's a crazy question. I've never thought about it that way. I was a different person. I am a different person today than I was then. And if I look at myself in the throes of my decade-plus struggle, it was very fixated on women and dating and pursuing pleasure, and it was my North Star. It was everything that I wanted. It was everything that I focused on. It was everything that I was moving towards. It wasn't like I wasn't doing anything else. I was working, I was attending church, but I wanted that because it felt good and I liked it. And now it's fascinating because I look back on that season of my life and I look back on the actions and decisions that I was making, and I'm like, who was that person? I kind of know at a visceral level. I was somebody that was pursuing pure hedonism and had no depth and foundation. And I live in a world now where I have an amazing marriage with an amazing family with little kids, and I'm serving in a purity ministry, and I'm serving in my church, and I'm able to step into other people's struggles and other people's stories and help and be a guide. And it is just a wild story. I'm like the first person who should be canceled. I am like the stuff from my past, like how I ended up in a purity ministry. It's all just God gets all that glory. There's nothing special that I get. It is God's story and God's glory of how he took me from the man whore, sexual debauchery, 10 plus years of that crazy to where I am today. And that doesn't mean I'm on a pedestal now. Oh, look at me. It's just like God can do that. And it's just crazy. I used to joke with my wife when we got married, like, wouldn't it be cool if I just volunteered for a purity ministry one day? Because I was so passionate about it. Again, that was that part of my story. And lo and behold, I ended up getting a job.
And now you're the CEO.
And now I'm the CEO. It's the only job interview where they will have asked and expected you to have struggled with unwanted sexual behaviors, pornography, lust, and masturbation.
Yeah.
The wild job interview.
It's crazy. Yeah. So you said earlier you're super passionate about, like, as a parent, like parenting your children in this. And so I'm really interested in anything you have to say. You've got all the passion for it. So I'm just here to listen to whatever you would think is the best to communicate on what you want to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a parent and you're still listening to this, the short, simplest thing I can say to you is stop right now. The thing that your brain is saying to you is, I still have time. I still have time. You are wrong. You do not still have time. You must lean into this conversation and what we want to create. So we built a product called thesextalk.com. It's a video course that helps parents have the sex talk with their kids. But the motivation was you need to begin having age-appropriate conversations with your children about this stuff around the age of 5 or 6. And then you need to have age-appropriate conversations for a decade with them, because that is how you give them a template for biblical sexuality, for godly sex and sexuality. So my 4-year-old, he knows the word penis and vagina. He knows who's allowed to touch him there and who's not. He knows he can come and tell mommy and daddy anytime someone is behaving inappropriately, and he now does. And so people always, the amount of emails I get of, I have young kids, I'm not there yet, just makes me want to shake them and scream, because we need to be building this framework into our children at an early age. And one of the simplest questions I can give a parent is, here is what you need to ask yourself. And if you can answer this question, then you're on the right path. Do I know, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that if my child is exposed to something in the area of sex and sexuality, whether it's a commercial on Hulu, whether it's someone shows him something on the school bus on a smartphone, that they can come and tell me about it and ask me about it? And if you can't say yes to that at whatever age your child is, then you're not yet on the path. And it's time to begin the path for the sake of your children's innocence and soul.
Yeah. And so so you're saying go through a whole decade basically of this talk, because when most culturally, like most of us think about it as like you have one super intense awkward talk in a really short period of time and you never say anything outside of that. So, but you're saying go on for an entire decade and just keep talking about it age appropriately and geared towards their experience and their age at that time, and kind of go through that.
Exactly. And so the unfortunate reality is, when I ask people, if they have any experience with this, most people didn't have a sex talk at all. And then if they did have a sex talk, it was one, and it was really awkward.
Yeah.
And I can think back to mine right now, and it's the same story. And so I don't know why this is the narrative, and I don't know where it came from, but somewhere in our culture, something has been communicated to us that is an absolute lie. I would argue it's probably from the enemy, that you can just have this talk once and your kids will be great to go.
Yeah.
That is so false. There is so much nuance and complication around this, and the amount in the Bible that we see sex and purity, that alone tells me we need to have more than just one conversation about this. And so for a parent, there will be one conversation or a series of conversations that are a lot more detail-oriented, and you might use the word intense, but you will have done so much work leading up to that it won't be this weird, awkward moment. And then you will do so much work after that in these conversations that there will be no such thing as an awkward moment, because we will have destigmatized this. And I think that's back to the whole darkness and light analogy. We need for our children to shine a light on this. Why is sex awesome? Why does sex feel good? Why did God make sex? How did God make men and women? What are we made for? What's this thing about intercourse and how babies are made? What is this stuff about oral sex? What is this stuff about hardcore pornography? How am I supposed to understand any concept of a framework for having sex in marriage? Like, the list goes on and on and on. Can you imagine if a parent began to have age-appropriate conversations with their child around the age of 5 or 6 and ushered them into a biblical sexual ethic that culminated towards when that child is engaged, when that child is about to get married? There is no framework right now, if you're a Christian and you're getting married, for you to learn anything about sex. There's literally none. You're lucky if you get one session on it in premarital. And it's almost as if, like, it's such a disservice. It's so inappropriate. It's so uncool. But could you imagine if part of the way you're ushering your child out of your home and into a new kingdom family And a part of that conversation was, okay, son, okay, daughter, here's what sex looks like in marriage. Okay, daughter, okay, son, here's what sex looks like after you have a baby. Okay, son, okay, daughter, here's what sex looks like after you've been married for a decade. And like, just imagine giving your child a framework for that. Because if you don't, which no one does and no one has, it's supposed to be this sex bad, now sex good. It must be and feel amazing. Like, that's all the framework that we're giving any of our people.
Right.
And we wonder why it's not going so well.
Yeah. So going back to talking about like with your children about this stuff, could you give us like a demo of what that would look like over the span of that decade? Just kind of
super highlighted, because there's no prescription here. Every family is different. Every parenting situation is different. You might be in I have stories of people in broken homes where when they're at dad's house, they have one experience and exposure, and when they're at mom's house, it's different. So this is the abridged version, but something like age 4, 5, 6, basic anatomical terms, biology, how God made man and woman. Then it begins to grow over time as they head into puberty, and we start to like, at 5 or 6, it's respect. So with my boys, respect for women. How do we honor them? My boys have a little sister. So it's like, we are protectors. We are caring for women. God made men in this way. And so like, you just begin creating this palette. Like at this point, they're starting, like, they know that mom and dad kiss each other. They're asking questions about marriage. My son's like, I don't want to get married one day. And it's like, okay, that's all right. And then it's hilarious. My 4-year-old knows that if we're watching even PG movies, even G movies, and someone kisses, that means they're going to get married. And like, he literally already has this framework for that. And this isn't some dogmatic, you only kiss someone, you're going to get married.
Yeah.
But what it is it's an example of curating this palette for them and not leaving anything open to interpretation. And I think that's the better thing to say around this, having parents have these talks or begin these conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
If you don't leave it open to interpretation, the amount of commercials that introduce LGBTQ plus ideology, right? You can say, hey, we don't watch this, or maybe we change the channel, or maybe we, stop and say, oh, that's weird, or like your kids are going to pick up on that, and you don't just like brush past it. You say, yeah, because God made men and women, and God made men and women to get married and have babies and have families. And like, at every different age, you're inserting biblical, godly truth and not leaving anything open to worldly interpretation. And so that's what the sex talk looks like. When my kids start dating, it's going to be super different. It's going to be at a certain age. It's going to be, here's how dad messed everything up. Here's where you can slip up, but here's the right way to do it. And here's how it can be fulfilling. At a certain age when their hormones are raging, it's going to look like, hey, like regularly, if not daily, dad's going to be checking in with you on like, hey, did you feel any temptation today? Hey, have you been struggling? Like, hey, how can I help you with this? How can I be a coach to come alongside of you in this? Yeah. How can we keep such a light shined in this area that there is no darkness that allows anything to grow?
Yeah.
And so having the sex talk with your kids is literally that. There is no prescription, but it is the power of first mention. One of my buddies, Drew Boa, is really great. He brought this idea up. It's like, you want to be the first one to mention anything. You don't want the world to get there first. You don't want Google to get there first. You don't want their classmates to get there first. You want to get there first. And so with godly truth and biblical sexuality. And so that's the mission. It doesn't even have to be hard. If you begin to normalize this in the home, it just becomes a way of life.
Yeah. So I'm sure one of the biggest reasons why the talk is like one singular, condensed, super awkward moment is because the parents have a hard time sitting down with their kid and being like, I'm going to talk to you about this, and they think it's going to be like they're uncomfortable. And so what do you think the mindset is that, because you're saying as a parent, I'm going to check in with my kid daily, and I'm sure a lot of parents would listen to that and be like, holy crap, that's intense. Like, I don't know how I'm going to go about that. What do you think the mindset is for a parent that they should have to help them kind of get out of that state and just be like, yeah, the most important thing is to be talking to the kid about this almost daily?
Yeah, so the short version is I'm also very passionate about parenting, and so I could go absolutely stand on like a pedestal here and just shout from the rooftops.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to cultivate a relationship with your child where, you're not just going from point A to point B, have the TV on, you go to church, yay. And so when I pick my kids up from daycare, it's like, hey, how was your day today? What did you do? Did anything make you feel uncomfortable? Like, I breeze past that question, but I've normalized it at the age of 4.
Yeah.
Like, imagine having that ability to do at any age. I was talking to a mom just the other day, and her son is 13, and she has already started to get a suspicion, went and found some search history, started to see some inappropriate thumbnails on YouTube Kids, on regular YouTube. And at this juncture in that story, I was saying, like, this is where you become, it's a single mom. So again, nuance in every part of this story, depending on your family dynamics. But in this, it's like, you can be the person that is his trusted confidant, that is like, hey, I'm here for you. Hey, like, I've lived in this life too. I remember what it was like to be 13. I know what this temptation feels like. And in this single mom's story, it was like, how can you come alongside of him so that he knows if and when he's struggling, he can go and tell mom and ask for help. Like, that's that mile marker. And it might be different, that your child might be 15 when you find that. Your child might be, unfortunately, 12 when you find that. And so you're really wanting to be the single source of truth around everything sex and sexuality with your children. And the way to do that is just to normalize the thing. God made it. There's nothing we can't talk about that God has made. And so it's going to look different in every family, but you will give your children such a gift if, when they get a smartphone, you have significant conversations around the dark things they could find and why it's so important that we're wise and we have filters in place. And like you're just doing relationship. You're just doing life with your kids, but it's almost like teaching your children how to play with fire. You don't just have one conversation with your kid around how to play with fire and then expect them to have it figured out.
Yeah.
That would be ludicrous.
Right.
But we do that with this topic, with sex and sexuality. And so it's like, hey, this thing is awesome. Oh, look at how well it warms the house. Oh, look at how well, like, it creates. Oh, look at how amazing that is. But, like, when it's not in the fireplace and it's on the couch, we all die.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do we normalize these conversations over time so that it's not weird? And if we acknowledge that it's everywhere and it's in our kids' faces and our faces at all times, then we would be doing a disservice to our children if we weren't trying to be proactive in this space.
Yeah. And arguably, it's way more dangerous than fire as well.
Exactly.
So what is, I think we can dive into this now. What is Proven Ministries? What is that all about?
Yeah, so simply put, Proven Ministries is a sexual integrity, faith-based nonprofit that operates at scale nationally. We have curriculum and resources for the whole family. We serve men, we serve women, we serve wives, and we serve parents. And we are about seeing a revival of sexual integrity throughout the entire bride of Christ. We do all kinds of fancy things. We have really cool purity quizzes, video encouragement series, 12-week small group studies, video courses, blogs, podcasts. But really what we are is we are just a megaphone into culture saying, hey, we have a path you can follow. Hey, there is a better way. You don't have to be stuck in isolation. You don't have to be stuck struggling on your own. Oh, and by the way, parents, we can help it so that your children never come across our desk 10 years later. And that's our work. That's what we're up to.
That's fantastic. You mentioned women is like a part of who you help. What do you think women's role and like place in all of this is? Because it's really dominantly talked about amongst men and being a man's problem. But where do you think the women stand in all of it?
Oh, women struggle just as much as men now. Those statistics changed and started changing rapidly 10 years ago. And so there was a short lag that we saw in the data, and now it, like, the struggle in women is just skyrocketing exponentially. Again, we live in a digital culture, the ubiquitous nature of pornography and smartphones. We see young women, I would say the millennial generation and under, are struggling as much, if not more than men. And
Really?
there's no reason to assume it's any different. It would be ludicrous to assume it's any different. Like, why would a man struggle with this more than a woman? Like, there's some different orchestration maybe for how they're seeing themselves in the pornography versus how a man is engaging the pornography. But either way, all the science applies. Everything is still exactly the same, and women struggle too. So it is really inappropriate to say this is just a man's problem.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why we have Proven Women.
So you think it's matched? Like, you think now
It's
at
very
that point?
close.
Okay.
In the younger generations.
Why do you think that because there was a gap before, right? Why do you think that's closed the gap?
I think it was just a taboo nature slowly. Like we lived in a culture, unfortunately, where men have always been portrayed as the womanizer, the wanting sex, the pornography at an early age was curated and delivered and designed to be given to men. We have this unique Playboy culture. We have this hustle culture that kind of breeds into this, like, yeah. And the short version is that the playing field was leveled with the internet. And now men and women were exposed to all the same things at the same amount of time, at the same amount of exposure rate. And so women are equally finding themselves stuck at early ages, exposed at early ages, right? Like, if you think about it, 20, 30 years ago, if you were a woman, it wasn't as easy to get exposed because, like, so many stories are young men where their uncle showed them something or their cousin showed them something, right? Like, there was just this male storyline.
Yeah.
But like, that wasn't a thing. So women just lagged a bit.
Okay. Yeah, wow, that's crazy. I had no idea. So you have Proven Women as a separate thing as opposed to the man. Is there a difference in how you approach helping women with this subject, or is it basically the same linearly?
Yeah, I would say it's the same format of a path with community, pursuing a personal relationship with Jesus as the primary way of filling yourself up so that stuff can fall out. And we have our provenwomen.org, which has our small group curriculum, just like our provenmen.org has the same thing. And we help groups start up all over the country. And so, yeah, there are nuances to the struggle, but by and large, it is the same journey to freedom, but for women.
Gotcha. So you're a Christian, and Proven Men is a Christian organization.
100%.
Why do you put Jesus first in this whole thing?
I would say at its core, it is in the purity space. There are different methodologies, not to get super like sciencey here, but some people take a more science-based approach. Some people take a more spiritual-based approach. I would say our curriculum in the purity space takes the spiritual disciplines approach, which is, and I believe it's right, but I'm biased, of course. But you know, your personal relationship with Jesus and the amount that you have filled yourself up with the Spirit and denied the flesh and fed the Spirit is the number one thing that will curate the byproduct you want. We're not doing it for that reason, but it's hard to fall down the rabbit trail of pornography addiction if you're in the Word every day, if you're seeking the face of Jesus every day, if you're walking and meditating on Him day and night, if this is just a part of who you are and you are seeking and pursuing truth, goodness, and beauty, and all that God has made for us to enjoy, and all the goodness of His guardrails, it's almost impossible to then do both of those things at the same time. They are counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And so our methodology, our approach, the way our curriculum is designed is seek a deep and personal and intimate relationship with Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and understand and spend time with Him and sit under His teaching and with Him around the the things we see in Scripture about purity, about sex and sexuality, about the way he made man and woman, and how he gave us the good gift of sex and purity and how it is to be used. And that will produce and guide you down the path of that goodness. Like you almost can't be doing both. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm sure someone has some story. You can comment in the comments if you want. But the science-based approach, we haven't seen work as well because it's just brain. It's just brain facts. Mm-hmm. And brain facts don't compel or change a lot of action. And so we're really going for the core of the soul, of the spirit. We want to go to the root. We want to go to the roots. And that's our methodology.
If you could say anything you wanted to say to a parent, what would you tell them?
You don't have time. You cannot wait. You're on a race with the devil to get to your kids first.
So is there anything else that you would like to say that has been just on the forefront of your mind that you would love to say?
To be honest, this has been a great conversation. And no, if you are still here and you're listening, just share this. I think that's probably what we've covered everything else. But the problem is this is unfortunately still something too easily ignored, too brushed over. Oh, I'll get around to that. Like, by shining a light on this, by us radically pursuing a new way of living in this culture, we can see a revival of sexual integrity. The listener can be a part of that. It's not just us. We are literally all locking arms together to do this. So join us, lock arms, connect, plug in, share this. Go to provenministries.org if you don't know what to do and you're just looking for something to do. But yeah, like, lean in. This will change everything.
Yeah. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. This was honestly a fantastic conversation. We dove into, I feel like everything, and I think it's going to help out a lot of men and a lot of parents and a lot of family. We got a lot of parents that check this out. And so it's really good to have you here and to talk about that. And just to have somebody else who is really bold in talking about these things, because it's such a shameful and it's like nobody wants to talk about it. So you never hear about it. And that's probably the biggest issue in the whole thing. I think like what we were saying earlier, shining a light on this instantly eliminates all that shame and everything, and putting it into the light just immediately fixes it, and starts just getting you on the road and onto the path of a better life. And so I think you're awesome in that way of being that bold and just being willing to talk about these things so openly. I know it's not easy, but as time goes on, it gets easier to talk about it. I mean, I'm sure you're at the point now where you're like, you just can talk. I mean, you're the CEO of Proven Ministries. I mean, which is awesome. So you have these conversations all the time, and you're a testament to that. It can get easier, and there is a way out of this. And you put the Lord at the forefront of all of it, which I think is super encouraging and awesome, because He really is the best way and probably the only real way you're going to get out of this. And so I just want to thank you and encourage you. Thank you for being here and having this conversation with me. Go check out provenministries.org or .com.
Both works.
Both works. It's an awesome ministry. I've checked it out. You guys do some really awesome things there. So yeah, man, thanks for being on.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.